So Japanese and Korean have this really weird relationship. They're not actually related at all, and yet they're really similar. Actually, in fact, over half of the vocabulary in both Japanese and Korean actually originate from Chinese. Even though Chinese grammar is really different, somehow both Japanese and Korean found a way to finagle with Chinese words in order to fit them into their own grammar systems. But the cool part is that they did it in such a very similar way. And that's because besides borrowing a lot of words from Chinese, both Japanese and Korean also have very similar grammar. This makes learning Japanese for Korean speakers pretty easy and vice versa. So let's explore together some of the different ways that you can actually take advantage of Korean in order to learn Japanese way faster. And then later I'll give you guys some resources if you want to go and take a crack at it yourself. Now before you even get started, you'll notice that the sounds of the Japanese language aren't that hard for native English speakers. Coming from Korean, this is a step up because Korean has so many vowels and so many different consonants that don't necessarily exist in English that it is really difficult to master all of those sounds when you're first learning Korean. Whereas with the Japanese, we only have 5 vowels, and for the most part, these vowels are pretty easy for English speakers. And in Japanese, the consonants are not as robust as Korean, so more or less, jumping into Japanese from Korean feels kind of like a breeze pronunciation-wise. But the one area of Japanese where people probably struggle with pronunciation is that R/L sound in Japanese. But coming from Korean, if you already know how to pronounce Lil, the Korean version of that sound, it's more or less the same in Japanese. So if you've already tackled that with Korean, you don't really have to worry so much when you go into Japanese because you can pretty much do it. Now, another really interesting thing about Japanese and Korean is that their grammar is really similar despite the languages not being related. Both languages follow a subject, object, verb structure, and both languages use particles to indicate the subject of a sentence, the topic of a sentence, the direct object, time, place, etc. And more or less, if you look at Japanese and you look at Korean, the sentence structure is very similar. They're so similar, in fact, that when I first started studying Japanese, I noticed that all of the new grammar that I was learning more or less had a 1-to-1 version in Korean. Either there was something that was basically identical in Korean or very, very similar. And because Japanese and Korean grammar is just so foreign to English speakers, the first time you encounter it, it's really challenging. If you know Korean, you know it is so hard to learn how to put sentences together. But if you've already tackled that with Korean and you've gotten to a point where you're at least intermediate, with Japanese, you're just going to kind of breeze by because you won't really need to relearn a lot of things. It'll be concepts that you're more or less familiar with. Now, both Japanese and Korean use formal language, but like the formal language is built into the language and the grammar itself. Now, obviously, Japanese and Korean will have different ways of using formal language and different constructs and different use cases for the different layers of formal language. When I was first learning Korean, the formality was really difficult, and when I first learned, I didn't really understand like how regularly it is used in day-to-day life. And then on top of the fact that you have to understand formality, you also have to understand that there are layers to formality. So because I had this familiarity with all of this complicated formality system with Korean, when I went to study Japanese, I was constantly like on the alert for, okay, what's the formal version of this? What situation should I use this in? I think because I was so aware of how complicated and how nuanced formal language can be, I had my ears perked up to pay more attention to that as a beginner learner of Japanese. Now, Japanese and Korean, they differ a lot in formal language, but if you have that background in Korean, it's going to be much easier for you to understand and grasp the concept of formal language in the first place, and it's going to definitely put you in a much better place than if you didn't know Korean at all and you had to learn the Japanese formality system like with zero context. Now, both Japanese and Korean, they borrow quite a few words from English, which is always going to be a little bit of a help. But as I said earlier, more than half of both of these languages are actually made up of Chinese origin words. And this means that when you go to study Japanese, if you already know Korean, a lot of words in Japanese are going to stand out to you and sound kind of similar to Korean. Now, because the languages are so similar, sometimes it's not obvious what this word would be in Korean. Maybe they're just pronounced very differently. But because of the context, I can kind of infer what parts of the sentence in Japanese are coming from Chinese as well. And then through that, I can kind of map it to Korean and realize like, oh, okay, so like this is how we say in Korean, this is how it's said in Japanese. So a really cool example of this is when I was studying Japanese, I came across this word right before student, ryu. And I was like, what is ryu? And I was like, oh, in Korean it's yu, like yu hakuseng, international student. In Japanese it's ryugakusei. And I was like, ah, okay, that's interesting because, fun fact for you guys, a long time ago, Korean used to put like a lot of words in Korean used to start with like nian and lil, but at some point this shifted. But because of this change later, at some point it changed to yu hakuseng. This is why in English you will see like last names like Lee, because that last name now it's E, but a long time ago it was Lee. Now this is all because in Korea, even though they no longer use Hanja, like they no longer use Chinese characters to write their language in the same way that Japanese does. If you're an intermediate or advanced speaker of Korean, you can probably already sense what words in Korean are actually Chinese because they tend to be more academic, more formal. A lot of the words that you would read in articles, like in the news, tend to be Chinese origin words. So if you speak Korean, even though we don't write and use Chinese characters, you can definitely sense what words are actually Chinese in origin. So when you learn Japanese, you come across things, you can use that knowledge you have of Korean, that sense you have in Korean, to make connections with the words in Japanese. Now, these are just some of the reasons that learning Japanese is much easier for Korean speakers, and arguably, the reverse is probably true as well. So if you know Korean and you want to learn Japanese, the good news is that there are a lot of resources for you to do that in Korean. Arguably, probably a lot more than there are in English. Now, the benefit of learning Japanese through Korean is that all of these things that we talked about, pronunciation, grammar, vocabulary, it's going to be much easier for you to compare all of this in Japanese to Korean than it would be for you to compare the Japanese to English. Okay, so some of the resources that I can recommend to you are basically any book in this series. It's 책 푸는 일본어. And so like this is the main textbook, but just so you guys know, this textbook like was updated in like the last year or so. So if you're shopping for this now, it's gonna actually be green and look different than this. Just a heads up. But they also have a grammar book that goes with this, and then they also have I have it here, this like reading and writing book as well. The nice thing about this is that there are 16 chapters. It's meant to be done in like 30 days or so. And each chapter has an online video lecture. And in the video lecture, you have both a Korean teacher and a Japanese teacher. So like all of the Japanese sentences, Japanese practice, it's all spoken by the Japanese teacher. But a lot of explanations are given in Korean by the Korean teacher. So it's really great, but like you have to know Korean to understand it. And honestly, like I compared this to Genki textbooks, and at least all of Genki 1 is like all of the grammar in Genki 1 is covered in this in 30 days. Like, can you imagine doing 30 days to get through a Genki textbook? That just goes to show like how much faster you can learn Japanese through Korean. Now, like in my version, because I have the older version, the red version, it actually came with something called a challenge book. And in that challenge book, it had like reading and an N5 and an N4 practice test. But if you get the new version now, which is like the green one, it only comes with the N5 and N4 practice test. But you can buy this one separately. I don't know if you're gonna like see it. Like this is like also 16 chapters of just reading in Japanese, but it's like a leveled reader. And it comes with audio so you can listen as well. But there's like 1, 2, 30 pages worth, makes up like one reading passage. And then it has like a Korean translation and like a little bit of like a grammar review. And then this one is really cool because it actually has the same passage. I don't know if you guys can see this, but it has the same passage. Like basically you read and you listen, and then when you want to move on to the next thing in here is they have a tracing page where you basically like trace the whole passage that you read. Now I really like this because I basically shadow the crap out of the article that I read. I digest it like very deeply, I shadow it, and then when I've shadowed it so much that's like really ingrained into my head, I can go and do the tracing, and when I'm doing the tracing, like I actually can read it aloud in the same way that I heard it spoken. So yeah, so there's this book. Also, this series has a grammar book as well, and then they also have like a lot of other books. Like there's a second reading book. Like in addition to this one, there's another book that's more difficult. They have like a word book. They have a lot of books. And then also like this textbook series, like this one, like, and now the green version of this one, it's considered a bestseller in Korea. Like every time I go to the bookstore, it is listed in the bestseller section, and I'm pretty sure it's like the #1 resource that people in Korea are using to learn Japanese. So don't just take my word for it. Take Kyobo Mungo's bestseller list as evidence that, you know, it's a good resource. Now, something else that I noticed is that there are a lot of resources for Korean speakers to learn Japanese. And I was actually kind of shocked because I went to Tokyo myself thinking I was going to find like a lot more books. And while there is like a selection of books to learn Japanese, I actually feel like there's more in Korea. And that's because Korea actually produces their own Japanese language learning resources. So like Korean companies develop Japanese learning resources and publish them for people in Korea specifically to use. Okay, so for those of you who are like, yeah, I know Korean, I want to get these books, but I'm not in Korea. But the best part is you can actually order the books online to the United States through a website called BANDIBOOKS. I'll put the link down in the description box so you can just go click it. But it's basically a website, like I'm not totally sure about their origin story or the lore behind it, but basically I think it's just a website for Koreans or like Korean Americans in America who want to have Korean books. Because it's basically all in Korean, and you can find like any book you can buy in a bookstore in Korea, you can pretty much find on that website. So essentially you can buy the books that I recommend, or you can look for other books to learn Japanese through Korean on that website and just have them shipped to you in the United States. Also, just check the description box. I'll put links to the specific books that I recommended down below so you guys can find them easily. Now, if you guys are interested in seeing a little bit more about how I go about studying Japanese, you can check out this video here, and in that video you can see a little sneak peek of how I use certain resources like this one.